kudos to you. You're not one of the VCs that I hate. Hello everyone, welcome. David, your host here for Leverage Asia. Hello folks, welcome to Leverage Asia. Welcome to Leverage Asia, everybody. How many more unicorns can Southeast Asia sustain? Should more people be open to this kind of thing and leverage Asia in that kind of way? Or is this not meant for everybody? Hello folks, welcome to Leverage Asia. It's your host David. Today I have a special guest. His name is Adrian Latortue. I don't know if I said that correctly. Adrian, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Adrian Latortue. I was born and raised in Connecticut and have been living in Vietnam for the last 14 years and mostly working in the tech and startup spaces and now working with ABV, which is formerly known as Ascend Vietnam Ventures for the last 3 years as a portfolio manager.
So let's eat, right?
Absolutely.
We have food
hungry.
here. Please introduce this food to the world. I have no idea what this is. I've never eaten this before. What the heck am I looking at?
Okay, so you asked me, hey, what are we going to eat in the morning? And I had to really think because I don't always eat breakfast. When I eat breakfast, I eat something really simple.
Neither.
So this is actually a traditional breakfast, Vietnamese food. It's called Xôi Vò. Soy is sticky rice.
Okay.
So Xôi Vò is just a type of sticky rice, but it's actually very difficult to make. So this is actually one of my favorite types of soy because it actually makes you feel like a little kid.
Okay.
Right? But what people do is they just can grab it with their hands.
Okay.
And they mash it into a little ball.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
And so to me, it's like a really fun food to eat.
Okay, you mash it into a little ball and you just eat it. There's no sauce. Oh,
right.
It tastes really good.
So it's very different than regular sticky rice because it doesn't like stick to your teeth and all this, right?
Yeah.
What prevents the soy from sticking to the grains from sticking to each other is that the mung bean.
Okay. I just see you released some questionable meat.
This is a pork floss.
Okay.
And then on top of this, you have the sausage.
Okay. For those who don't know what pork floss is, please introduce what pork floss is because it sounds disgusting.
So I think actually most people, they might have experienced some form of it, but it's just dry pork and it's shredded, right? So you have the fibers of the
this thing right here.
Of the meat, yeah. And it's usually seasoned in different ways. It's very common to have with soy, not just Xôi Vò, all kinds of soy. Yeah.
Ooh, I'm actually enjoying this. So why are they covered with banana leaves? These are banana leaves, right?
Yeah, this is more traditional. Some places will sell it in just like a plastic container. Well, the traditional way of eating soy is like, it's wrapped in a banana leaf. Yeah.
This is awesome.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite foods, so yeah.
So, as we eat, I just want to ask you, when was the first time you came to Vietnam?
2007.
2007?
Yeah, summer 2007.
Wow.
So I say I've been in Vietnam for 14 years, and that's really counting from when I came back to Vietnam on a Fulbright. That was my first full year living in Vietnam. My first time was actually 17 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
17 years ago. I can't even imagine what Hanoi would have looked like back then. My God, how old are you? No, you don't need to say, you don't need to mention this. 14 years ago, because you look like you're like early 30s, late 20s at best. No, talk about your skincare routine. Please, enjoy more food.
Yeah.
Okay, since we're talking about your college days to do this, if we have people who are kind of tuning into this and they're maybe high school or college kids right now, they're students, why should they come to Vietnam versus, let's say, go to China or go to Japan or Korea or Taiwan or and then India? I'm not saying Vietnam's better than any of these countries, but why should these students consider coming to Vietnam and checking it out versus these other countries in Asia?
I think it's hard to kind of talk about all these elements in Vietnam if someone hasn't been here. So I'll try to explain this in a way that helps people think about the way they can relate to Vietnam. Similar to me, there's a lot that will seem foreign here, right? There's a lot of attention that's put on China, East Asia, right, with Korea, Japan. There's a lot of attention put on South Asia, India, right? And a lot of it's for economic reasons, right?
Right.
And that's great, right? And economies, they rise and they fall. But what the underlying element of all economies is people. Vietnam as a place, I think, has a really strong network around the world, right? A large diaspora. And many parts of the diaspora are connected to one another, right? Diaspora in the US, France, Germany, right? There's people in Finland, right? Russia, was the former Soviet Union, Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, right? And so I've met people in, the U.S. who are like, oh yeah, my cousins are in Vietnam and stuff, and then I, was able to meet their cousins, and they become really good friends of mine, right? And then part of their extended network I've met, right? As economies get really big, I think that interconnectedness starts to dissipate a little more, right? So, generally people say, hey, you're 6 degrees of connection for anyone. I think in some place like Vietnam, you could be 3 or 4.
Well, that's actually a very good point. Because there are Chinese diaspora everywhere too. It's kind of like deciding to go to, because Yale, you went to Yale University. Very great school, very, very good school. But it's not that huge.
Nope.
It's actually quite small, It's a very small school with a small student body. It's very selective. But because of that, when you go around the world and you find Yalees somewhere else in the world, there's an instant bond, right? Versus you can go to a school that has, 30,000 people per class, a lot of people. You'll find more of them all over the world, but that instant, we're special, that bond isn't quite there. Not to say that Chinese diaspora and connection isn't there, it's just the number game is different.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think you brought up a very astute point there, because you're right. That's the advantage of Vietnam, or a country like Vietnam, its size and its momentum and its history. That's cool.
I think in comparison, I'll just add this. I had friends that were living in Shanghai, and they lived in Shanghai for several years, and they said that one thing being in Vietnam reminded them was kind of this early period when they're in Shanghai.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, especially foreigners, they hung out in the same area.
Yep.
And they all knew each other.
Yep.
It doesn't mean they were like best friends and like that, but they knew, hey, this person's here for this, and this is how long they've been here. This is this whole world and life about them. And Vietnam was very similar. And so you can build a really strong network here with people who are like-minded, right?
And it's very real. We're not even joking around. You can actually build real relationships.
Absolutely.
Much easier than a country that's more saturated with interests.
Yeah, you don't want to be like just another new person that came here, right? And maybe passing through. You want to be able to come here and just build really great relationships, and those relationships be kind of the guide that leads you through everything that this place has to offer, right?
Yep. Before we talk about that key $1 million question of why people should be leveraging Asia, let's hear a little bit more about what you do day to day here. Tell the world why we should be listening to you.
It's hard to toot my own horn.
I can toot it for you, but why don't we have you start? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I mentioned I've been living in Vietnam for 14 years. Most of my time during that has been working with tech startups, including Rocket Internet, Uber. I was a founder myself, so kind of experienced firsthand kind of that hustle and bustle trying to build a company in Vietnam. And then in the last 3 years, I pivoted, I transitioned to venture capital. And so that's when I started working with AVV. Before we get to that though, and talk about AVV and what I do with AVV, I'll say actually my background is not in venture capital or tech startups or tech. I studied architecture at Yale.
Wait, okay, time out. I knew about your founder background, but architect. Yeah. Ooh, there's more to this man than meets the eye. When I think architecture, I think Ted Mosby from How I Met Your Mother. Some of the companies that you just mentioned, they're like the Amazons of today and whatnot. That's awesome. VC.
Yep. So
there's some insight about that you have about the region, about Vietnam, even as an investor. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I didn't say to myself, hey, I want to become a VC, right? But I had this path of being recruited to join companies because of this history I had in Vietnam and being able to speak Vietnamese, and so be able to connect with people, build relationships, and just be able to operate at a level to just get things done at a very early stage.
Right.
Not so focused on, hey, I'm going to do this role or specialize for this, but saying, hey, I kind of can be that generalist at a very early stage in a market that at the time not a lot of people really understood that well. But there's this path of being the CXO or the founder or the go-to-market guy. And at some point, especially after I left Uber, I realized maybe that's not what I wanted, right? There's a lot of different ways to build companies, and the kind of the models that we borrow from Silicon Valley and try to apply to all the emerging markets, maybe that's not necessarily the best model for every single place and for every single business. And instead of just saying that, I say, well, maybe I should go and explore that a little bit. I've been privileged to witness all of these things happening in Vietnam, and so to be an investor means to be able to say, hey, I'm putting my time, resources, and capital into the things that I believe in. Right? And that can be tech businesses, that can be some of these other entrepreneurial ventures that are up and coming in Vietnam, right? I say, how do I best position myself to be able to do that, right? If I want to be here for the long run, then I have to be able to see myself playing those roles in this market. If it's just CXO at some point, as this market matures, you just have bigger companies that are like, we need like a head of operations to kind of do this, really for things that I probably don't care that much about. Right?
So, I mean, this actually gives us a good reason to listen to you. You bring both depth and like breadth, right? So let's get to that key question. Why should people be leveraging Asia?
Why leverage Asia? So I think, I'll rephrase it a little bit. I think like leveraging Asia, it sounds a bit like too capitalist. It's like, I get what you mean, right? It's, why think about Asia as this place that has a strategic position and benefit, and why build that relationship in Asia, right? I think coming to Asia and thinking about Asia, it has to be two ways, right? Like, what are the things that we learn and we pick up from Asia as a place, not just the economic side, but also the cultural side. Like, how can that better inform the way we build companies? How to better inform the way that we think about our own society, right? An example of that I'll say is like, one of the things I've learned, and somebody said to me a long time ago, I never heard it said in the US, culture is destiny.
Culture is destiny.
Let's
let that sit in for a second. Culture is destiny. What the hell does that mean?
And so you think about how a lot of these markets in Asia have evolved, societies have evolved in Asia. A lot of it is dependent on culture, right? So really strong culture identity, right? Even the evolution of culture. So even in Vietnamese, the word that means culture, văn hóa, hóa signifies something that changes. And if you actually look at Vietnamese culture today, say, oh, it's it's like very traditional. But like, no, actually, it changes, right? And so you can actually add hóa to a lot of other words, and it means that, hey, it changes. So culture is destiny. Hey, there's a strong cultural identity, cultural practices that happen that actually support the growth of a country and that economy. So, strong emphasis on education, family values, healthcare, so on and so on. There's like quotes like, hey, in Vietnam, families and households spend 30% more on education and healthcare than other countries in the region.
Right.
That's not a coincidence.
Right.
It's not saying, hey, they just have more money. It's like, no, on a values level, this is something they really care about. And it's evident, and has nothing to do with politics.
You would not be able to see this kind of beautiful insight had you not, come out here. But now it's almost like, you have two homes. You have the United States, you have Vietnam. And I use the term third culture a lot. You are a third culture individual yourself. You don't have to be born in another country with parents who are from America to be third culture. You literally have blended these two cultures. You're playing a very integral role in bridging these communities and cultures. And that is a benefit to you, right?
Like, it's been immensely beneficial.
It's taken you to open new relationships, right? And why should more people be doing this? Like, that's something that I really ask. Should more people be open to this kind of thing and leverage Asia in that kind of way? Or is this not meant for everybody? Should they dig in and be like, some people are meant to do the whole Asia experience and some aren't? Honestly, this is an honest question.
That's a great question. I don't have a concise answer to that. I think that everyone should be open to it, and if there's an opportunity that they have, like, explore it, right? Really view that as like there's some kind of pull, there's some vibration that's pulling you in a direction, and really explore it. I wouldn't say go out of your way right?
Okay.
And say, you know, I'm gonna make sure I get there, because you have to really look for that alignment in terms of the things that you are doing. You know, for people that want to come to Asia, it's like, yeah, if you have that calling, or there's something that keeps showing up. In Vietnamese, you call it Duyen, right? There's like,
Duyen.
yeah, it's like there's like charm or destiny, right? And so it could be that you just keep meeting people from a certain community, and if you're vibing with that community, and I say, you know what, like, dive deeper into that, right? There's no harm in that.
Yeah. And
as you dive deeper into that, you see things, you're like, hey, this is interesting, it's cool, and there's things I'm learning about myself, and okay, cool, just keep doing that.
That is good advice, because I think many Americans, look, we go many paths, but if you have that personal connection, the micro touch points, why not lean into it, right? And this is kind of my last question, and it's actually a curious question I'm sure a lot of audience members have, is when I was in China, it mattered that I looked Japanese or Chinese or whatnot. You know, you're African American. Here, do you feel any sort of discrimination? Do you feel any sort of like push here? Yeah.
I think so. The short answer for me is that not really.
Okay.
I've met a lot of ignorance.
Okay.
Right? And I think for me it was important, especially coming to Vietnam earlier and being, you know, one of very few African Americans or black people in Vietnam. There were, you know, some Africans, a very small African community at that time, but I was one of the very few people that was black in Vietnam. So I felt there was a lot of ignorance. Yeah. And that ignorance, I think, was just due to the lack of exposure that people had and access that people had to, you know, black Americans, black folk. What's changed is that now there's more people, right? So ignorance, I distinguish ignorance, or I separate them into, there is ignorance and there's willful ignorance.
Yeah. Okay. So because that word ignorant can carry a lot of negative weight too.
Absolutely.
This is not negative ignorance.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
The ignorance is just you just don't know.
Yeah.
And the way that I think, you know, the response to that ignorance is really important, because I think somebody who's just ignorant, and they might ask something that feels a bit stupid or ignorant, right? And it's just based on their context. But when you explain, then they really listen. Yeah. And they ask more questions. Yeah. And the questions get smarter. Yeah. Right? And you're like, oh, they're really trying to learn. Yeah. If we don't actually give them a real answer, then maybe we don't know if they're really trying to learn. Yeah. The willful ignorance, I think, where, you know, my tolerance of like that ignorance kind of just drops, it plummets, is, you know, you meet somebody who has had all these opportunities to learn. Yeah. And they have the evidence in front of their face, and they have the resources, they have the books, they have the internet. They have access to communities where they could go dive in and learn more, and they have actively chosen not to, because holding on to their prejudices or their biases is more comfortable than going out into the world and learning something new that challenges maybe parts of their own identity. In terms of like leveraging Asia, you know, I gave a spiel about kind of this two-way relationship. So like why come to Asia? Why leverage Asia? Obviously, there's different levels to this. There's the economic reasons, right? And so I think on a very basic level, for the capitalists out there, they're like, I want to build something, right? You have these very fast-moving economies, okay, right? And even economies that have matured very much, on a micro level, there's so much that changes within them. There's a different prioritization of how people might sell in this market, the things they care about, right? It's not just, hey, I'm going to create the best product and just sell it for as much money as possible. It's like, where does this really fit into the economy, right? Who is it serving? Is it serving the businesses, serving just my family needs? Is it serving my community, right? And is it serving kind of society in this wider region? I find there to be a little bit more thought about that. The second level, I think, you know, being in Asia offers, I think, a lot of cultural perspectives that are sometimes very opposite to what we are familiar with in the U.S., right? I won't say the West. I think, like, you know, that includes Europe. And
it includes a lot of countries.
Exactly. I actually don't like when people say the West, like Western countries. I'm like, no.
Let's not be willfully ignorant.
Yeah.
Let's be ignorant.
Let's be regular ignorant. So, you know, I would say, like, let's say U.S. and Canada, I think there's a lot of cultural perspectives here that are different, right? And to see how those are implemented in, or they're practiced in society, in the home and also in business, I think is really important. And so this, because emphasis on relationships, right? Whether it be family relationships, relationships between colleagues, it's very different in the U.S. as in Asia. And one of the things I had to learn here, and I'm very grateful that I've learned this, and I hope I've learned it, right? And I try to practice it, is really understanding who your colleagues and your business partners are, right? As individuals, right? They're not defined by what they do, right? But they are individuals, they have families, they have their own hopes and dreams. And I think the more that we understand that, then the more we're able to put ourselves in a position, we're able to create value for them, right? And we're able to speak truths, right? So, there's always a joke, like people talk around, but in reality, I think there's a level of relationship you can build that lasts beyond kind of that immediate commercial agreement that you have, right? And that's been the case for a lot of people that I've worked with, right? Whether we've been in the same company, we hired that person and we became friends, or we just had contracts together, right? And you had Ryan on the podcast, right? And so Ryan, I mentioned before, somebody I met 12 years ago, right?
That's a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody's entire lifetime, one of our audience members.
Yeah. In summary, hey, like leverage Asia, there's this kind of rapid growth in the economy at a macro level, at a micro level, just rapid feedback. There's a lot of stimulation, a lot of ideas, a lot of feedback that you get. The second part is being open to the cultural influences that Asia presents to us, where we grew up in kind of this American culture, right? And saying, hey, this can actually be beneficial to us. There's a lot of emphasis on soft power from kind of the U.S. coming to Asia, which in very much in a consumerism format. But there's, I think, this kind of underutilized and kind of underrepresented influence that comes from Asia in terms of cultural influence, and saying how can that actually help the way that we think about our society and businesses.
It's almost an enlightened mirror. Yeah, you're absolutely right. No, this is good. I wish we had more time, because I know you have another appointment. There's all these things happening. Thank you so much, Adrian. We're going to have you again, okay?
Okay,
I would love to have you more.
Love it, yeah.
Well, this was Leverage Asia, guys. We'll talk to you again at some point.
It took me a while to understand this. My friend would always say to me, like, Li Zhe, right? And I was like, what does that mean? What that could mean was just like walking along the river. I was like, is this dude taking me on a walk?